10 signs the dead have blessed your home. Cayce's forgotten warning. There was a farmhouse on the edge of a small Virginia town, white clapboard siding, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, oak trees older than anyone could remember. When the Morrison family moved in, they expected nothing more than a fresh start. What they found was something else entirely. Within the first month, they noticed something unusual. Every person who crossed that threshold mentioned the same thing. Not in the same words, but the same feeling. I feel lighter here. I slept better on your couch than I have in years. My headache just disappeared. Claire Morrison's sister arrived with chronic lower back pain she'd carried for a decade. After 3 hours in the living room, the pain had softened to a whisper. By the next morning, it was gone. She called it a miracle. Claire called it strange. Their youngest son, who had battled night terrors since he was 2, began sleeping through the night. No thrashing, no screaming, just deep, untroubled rest. Arguments that started in the driveway dissolved before they reached the kitchen. Tensions that felt unbearable outside those walls became manageable inside them. Then came the night Claire's friend Sarah visited. Sarah was what some call sensitive, what others call a medium. She stood in the hallway, eyes closed, and said what everyone had been feeling but couldn't name. Someone who loved this place is still here, and they're taking care of you. The family learned later that the previous owner had been a woman named Margaret, a healer, a medium herself. She had died in the upstairs bedroom 5 years before, surrounded by students and friends, at peace with her transition. Margaret wasn't haunting the house. She was blessing it, and Edgar Cayce knew exactly how to recognize when this was happening. Most people assume that any spiritual presence in a home is either neutral or negative, a ghost, an echo, something to fear or cleanse away. But Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, whose readings are preserved in over 14,000 transcripts, taught something radically different. He said that elevated souls, those who had crossed successfully into higher dimensions and evolved beyond earthly attachments, could return to specific locations, not to linger, not to cling, but to offer something precious: protection, guidance, healing energy. He called these benediction presences, and he insisted they operate by entirely different spiritual laws than earthbound spirits. A haunting, Cayce explained, is a form of spiritual stagnation. The soul hasn't fully crossed. It remains tethered to trauma, unfinished business, or confusion about its own death. These presences drain energy. They create cold spots, oppressive atmospheres, and fear responses in the living. They don't mean harm necessarily, but they're trapped in a frequency of suffering. A blessing is the opposite. It comes from a soul that has crossed fully, reviewed its life in what Cayce called the borderland, and chosen to return temporarily, not out of need, but out of love. These presences elevate energy. They inspire peace, comfort, and a sense of being watched over, not surveilled, cherished. In one documented case preserved in the ARE archives, Cayce described a home where 3 generations reported feeling held during times of crisis. A grandfather who had been a minister returned after death not to haunt, but to consecrate. His presence didn't frighten, it sanctified. The signs, Cayce said, are distinct if you know what to look for. Hauntings create disturbance. Blessings create sanctuary. Hauntings bind spirits to the past. Blessings reflect a soul's completed work and conscious choice to serve. Hauntings make you want to leave. Blessings make you want to stay. And Cayce documented 10 unmistakable signs that a benediction presence has chosen your home. 10 ways the veil thins not with fear, but with grace. But first, you need to understand why some homes are chosen and others are not. Not every house receives this gift. Cayce explained in his readings that ancestral spirits and benevolent dead don't bless randomly. They're drawn to homes where specific conditions exist, conditions of the heart, conditions of the soul. First, spiritual receptivity. The living must be open even if they don't consciously believe. A family that prays together, meditates, reads spiritual texts, or simply lives with reverence for the unseen creates an energetic invitation. Skeptics can live in blessed homes too, Cayce noted, if their skepticism is honest inquiry rather than rigid closure. Second, emotional openness. Homes filled with authentic emotion, grief expressed rather than suppressed, joy celebrated rather than muted, love spoken rather than assumed, become porous to spiritual presence. The benevolent dead are drawn to authenticity. They avoid emotional pretense like fire avoids water. Third, meaningful work. Cayce saw this repeatedly. Homes where healing happens, where children are raised with consciousness, where art is created, where justice is pursued, where the broken are welcomed. These homes hum at a frequency that attracts blessing. The work doesn't have to be grand. A mother raising her children with patience and intention does as much to sanctify a space as a minister leading a congregation. But there's another factor, one that transcends human action, the land itself. Cayce taught that certain physical locations carry what he called creative force attunement. Places near flowing water, land where old growth trees have stood for centuries, ground where prayers have been offered for generations by indigenous peoples or monastic communities. These locations have energetic histories they remember. A home built on such land inherits that resonance. It becomes easier for benevolent spirits to maintain presence there because the earth itself cooperates. In one reading, Cayce described a cottage built on the site of an old Quaker meeting house. The family who lived there reported dreams of guidance, spontaneous healings, and a palpable sense of being protected. Cayce confirmed the land had been consecrated by centuries of silent worship. The spirits of those Quakers, long past, still tended the ground. Your willingness to acknowledge these presences amplifies their ability to help you. Gratitude strengthens the bridge. Recognition clarifies the signal. But here's what most people want to know. How do you know they're actually there? What are the signs that your home has been chosen? Let's begin with the first. It happens suddenly. You're walking through your kitchen and the air fills with the scent of roses. But it's January. There are no flowers in the house. Or you're sitting alone in your study and the unmistakable smell of pipe tobacco drifts past. No one in your family smokes. No one ever has. Or you wake in the middle of the night to the fragrance of lavender so strong it feels like someone has crushed the blooms beside your pillow. You search the room. Nothing. This is the first sign Edgar Cayce documented, spontaneous fragrance without physical source. In the ARE archives, there are dozens of cases where families reported these olfactory visitations. A widow smelled her husband's cologne on the anniversary of his death. A daughter smelled her mother's favorite perfume, white shoulders, unmistakable, in a room that had been locked for years. These aren't faint impressions, they're vivid, localized, and they often appear during moments of emotional significance. When you're making a difficult decision and need guidance. When the family gathers after a long separation and old wounds need tending. When you're drowning in grief and need to know you're not alone. Cayce explained that scent pierces the veil between worlds more easily than sight or sound. It bypasses the rational mind and speaks directly to the limbic system, the ancient part of the brain where memory and emotion reside. A benevolent spirit can imprint a fragrance into the etheric field of a room, and for a few moments it becomes as real as anything physical. But here's the critical distinction. In hauntings, smells are acrid, sulfuric, decaying. They create revulsion. In blessings, fragrances are pleasant, comforting, and brief. They arrive like a calling card, a gentle way of saying, I'm here, you're not alone, I remember and I'm watching over you. One woman wrote to the Association for Research and Enlightenment, describing how every time she argued with her teenage daughter, the scent of her own grandmother's baking bread would fill the kitchen. Not imagined. Real enough that her daughter smelled it too. The arguments would soften. The tension would break. Cayce confirmed in a reading. The grandmother who had died peacefully years before was interceding, offering comfort through the language of memory. Why scent? Because it can't be argued with. You can dismiss a shadow as imagination. You can explain away a sound as the house settling, but when you and 3 other people smell pipe tobacco in an empty room, and it was your grandfather's brand and he's been dead for 15 years, skepticism falters. The benediction presence knows this. They choose the medium that will reach you, but fragrance is only the beginning. The second sign moves from the invisible to the visible, from scent to matter. Clocks stop at meaningful times. Lights flicker during prayers. Phones ring, and when you answer, there's only silence. But the number displayed is your grandmother's old landline, disconnected 5 years ago. Radios briefly tune to a deceased loved one's favorite song, then return to static. Edgar Cayce taught that benevolent spirits manipulate electromagnetic fields with intention, not to frighten, to communicate. He made a critical distinction. Poltergeist activity is chaotic, aggressive, random. Objects fly, furniture moves. There's an element of rage or confusion. That's earthbound energy, unresolved and destructive. But in blessed homes, the anomalies are timed. They're precise. They correspond to anniversaries, birthdays, or moments when the living desperately need guidance. In one documented case, a man was debating whether to sell his family's farm. The night before he planned to sign the papers, every clock in the house stopped at 3:17 a.m. He woke, unsettled. Then he remembered. That was the exact time his father had died. He didn't sell. 3 months later, a developer approached him with an offer to lease the land instead, preserving it while providing income. He knew his father had intervened. Cayce explained that spirits who have crossed retain the ability to influence matter, but it requires immense focus and energy. They choose their moments carefully. A doorbell rings when you're sitting in silence, contemplating a decision that will change your life. You open the door. No one's there. But the question in your heart suddenly has an answer. A light bulb flickers above your head during a conversation, and you realize mid-sentence what you need to do. These aren't malfunctions. They're messages delivered through the language of the material world, because that's the language we understand. One widow reported that her husband's antique pocket watch, which hadn't worked in decades, began ticking the night she finally decided to scatter his ashes at sea. It ticked for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped. She knew. He approved. Cayce warned that not all electronic disturbances are benevolent. If the activity creates fear, drains you, or feels invasive, that's not blessing, that's something else. But if the disturbances feel like nudges, like someone tapping your shoulder to get your attention, and they align with moments when you need support, trust it. The benevolent dead are resourceful. They work with what you'll notice, and sometimes they work through beings who notice things humans have forgotten how to see. Edgar Cayce often said that animals and young children are natural mediums. They perceive spirits without the filters of skepticism, fear, or cultural conditioning. The third sign of blessing manifests through them. A dog sits in the hallway, tail wagging, staring at nothing, not with the alertness of guarding, with the joy of greeting. You call him away. He returns to the same spot, ears perked, body relaxed. A cat curls up in the corner where your mother died, purring as if being stroked by invisible hands. A toddler waves at the top of the stairs, laughing, And when you ask who she's talking to, she says, "The nice lady. She says not to worry." You don't see anyone, but the child does. Cayce explained that animals and children exist closer to the threshold between worlds. Their consciousness hasn't been trained to filter out subtle frequencies. They see what is, not what they've been taught should be. In blessed homes, animals show affection toward the invisible presence. They don't cower. They don't bark defensively. They wag. They purr. They settle into spaces with visible comfort, as if lying beside someone they trust. Children are even more direct. They describe conversations. They report being helped by someone the adults can't perceive. A boy says his grandfather, who died before he was born, visits at night to check on him. The parents dismiss it as imagination, but the boy describes details he couldn't know. The grandfather's limp, his favorite phrase, the exact location of a birthmark. In one reading, Cayce advised a mother whose daughter kept insisting her other grandmother tucked her in at night. The family had lost the maternal grandmother 2 years prior. Cayce confirmed the grandmother was present, offering comfort, ensuring the child felt protected. He urged the mother not to dismiss the experience, but to ask gentle questions. The child was describing exactly what was true, but here's the warning Cayce gave. Don't force it. Don't interrogate. Children who sense spirits can become frightened if adults react with fear or over-interest. Let them speak naturally, validate without dramatizing. "That's wonderful. I'm glad she visits you." Then let it be. Animals don't need validation. They simply respond to what they perceive. If your pet is calm and affectionate toward an empty space, that's data. If they're agitated and defensive, that's different data. Trust what your animals and children are telling you. They're reading the room more accurately than you are. And sometimes the messages come not in waking life, but in the territory where the veil is thinnest. The fourth sign arrives in sleep. Cayce taught that dreams are the soul's native language. When the body rests and the conscious mind releases control, the soul travels. It visits other dimensions. It communes with guides, with deceased loved ones, with aspects of itself that exist outside time. Benevolent spirits often communicate through dreams because the defenses are down. The skeptical mind isn't there to argue. Symbolic language flows freely. Families in blessed homes report remarkably similar dreams. A deceased loved one appears, but not as they were in their final days. Sick, diminished, struggling. They appear radiant, healthy, whole, and they speak with clarity. These aren't typical grief dreams where the loved one is distant or the narrative is confused. These are what Cayce called visitation dreams. Coherent, vivid, often containing information the dreamer couldn't have known. In one case, a woman dreamed of her father, who had died 6 months earlier. He told her to check the attic behind the insulation near the chimney. She woke unsettled. She hadn't been in the attic in years, but she climbed up, moved the insulation, and found a metal box. Inside, stock certificates her father had purchased decades ago and forgotten. They were worth over $50,000. Cayce confirmed in a reading her father had remembered them after crossing and wanted to ensure she was cared for. Another man dreamed his late business partner warned him against a deal he was about to sign. The man woke, dismissed it as anxiety, signed the contract. 3 months later, the partner's warning proved accurate. The deal was fraudulent. He lost everything. He wrote to Cayce in desperation. Cayce's reading was gentle but firm. The warning was given, the choice was yours. Visitation dreams often include warnings, but just as often they offer reassurance. A mother appears to her daughter and says, "I'm proud of you. You're doing better than you think." The daughter wakes in tears, but they're not tears of grief. They're tears of relief. Cayce taught that these dreams are as real as waking encounters. They occur in what he called the borderland, the dimension between physical reality and higher spiritual planes. The loved one has traveled to meet you. You've traveled to meet them. The conversation is genuine. How do you know it's a visitation and not just a dream? Cayce gave 3 tests. First, the loved one appears healthy and whole, never suffering. Second, they communicate something useful, comfort, guidance, information. Third, the memory of the dream doesn't fade. Days, weeks, years later, you can recall it with perfect clarity. If your dream meets all 3 criteria, it wasn't symbolic processing, it was communion. And sometimes the communion extends beyond words into the physical realm. The 5th sign is the most dramatic. It's when the invisible becomes undeniable. A child is running toward the stairs. She trips. In the split second before she falls, she feels hands catch her shoulders. She rights herself, looks back. No one's there. A man is driving at night, exhausted. He hears a voice shout, "Stop!" He slams the brakes. A deer leaps across the road, exactly where he would have been. He knows that voice. His father, dead 3 years. A woman is in the kitchen when a pot of boiling water tips from the stove. She watches it happen in slow motion, knowing she can't move fast enough. The pot stops midair, settles back onto the burner. She stands there shaking, trying to rationalize what just happened. Edgar Cayce documented dozens of cases where invisible forces intervened in physical reality to prevent harm. He called these guardian intercessions. They have a signature. They occur during genuine danger, not inconvenience, not mild risk, actual life or death moments. They're swift and precise, not lingering, not theatrical, just enough intervention to avert disaster. And those involved often report recognizing the presence, the feel of the hands that caught them, the sound of the voice that warned them. It's someone they loved, someone who loved them, still fulfilling the promise to watch over them. In one reading, a mother asked Cayce about an incident where her son had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff during a hiking trip. He felt a hand yank his backpack. He turned. No one. Cayce confirmed his grandfather, a mountain guide in life, had not abandoned his role in death. But here's what Cayce warned. If you dismiss these interventions as coincidence or luck, you weaken the connection. Gratitude strengthens the bridge between worlds. Acknowledgement invites more help. You don't have to broadcast it. You don't have to convince anyone, but speak your thanks aloud, even if you feel foolish. Thank you. I know you were there. I know you helped me. The benevolent dead don't require your belief, but they respond to your recognition. And their presence doesn't just protect in moments of crisis, it saturates the space itself. The 6th sign is atmospheric. It's in the air, the walls, the very quality of light that fills the rooms. Cayce described blessed homes as having what he called a presence of peace. It's not something you see. It's something you feel the moment you cross the threshold. People sleep better there. Chronic insomnia fades after a few nights. Even guests comment on it. I haven't slept like that in years. Emotional conflicts that feel unbearable outside those walls become manageable inside them. Couples on the brink of separation sit down at the kitchen table and suddenly find words they couldn't access before. Clarity arrives. Physical ailments improve. Not miraculously, not overnight, but faster than expected. A man with chronic migraines moves into a house his grandmother owned. The migraines diminish in frequency, then intensity, then finally stop altogether. He tells his doctor. The doctor has no explanation. This isn't placebo, it's measurable. Plants thrive in blessed homes. Pets are calmer. Children are healthier. Even skeptical visitors remark on feeling restored after spending time there. Cayce taught that benevolent spirits elevate the vibrational frequency of a space. They create what he called a sanctuary field, a zone where lower energies struggle to maintain themselves. Fear, illness, conflict, they all lose their grip in a blessed home. Not completely, not permanently. A blessed home doesn't make you immune to suffering, but it becomes a place where suffering moves through you more cleanly, where you recover faster, where you remember who you are beneath the pain. One family described it as living inside a soft hum. They couldn't hear it, but they felt it. A baseline of calm that underlay even the hardest days. Cayce explained that this happens because the benevolent presence is literally holding the space, consecrating it with intention, pouring love into the molecular structure of the home. It's an act of spiritual service. But how do you know this is blessing and not just good architecture, not just psychology or wishful thinking? You know because the effect is consistent, because others notice it without being prompted, because the healing isn't in your imagination, it's in your body, your relationships, your life. And because the blessing reveals itself in even subtler ways. The final 4 signs are quieter, easier to miss, but no less real. Sign 7. Objects placed meaningfully. You set your grandmother's photo on the dresser, facing away from the bed. You wake up. It's been turned to face you. You know you didn't do it. A book you've been meaning to read for months suddenly appears on your nightstand, opened to a page that answers the exact question you've been wrestling with. Your mother's wedding ring, which you lost years ago and tore the house apart searching for, appears in the middle of your kitchen table. You've searched that table 100 times. Now there it is. Cayce taught that benevolent spirits can manipulate physical objects when the timing is right. Not constantly, not theatrically, but in moments when you need a nudge, a reminder, a sign that you're being seen. Sign 8. Synchronicities clustering around the home. Every conversation that happens at your kitchen table seems to answer an unspoken question. Friends visit and, without meaning to, say exactly what you needed to hear. Books find their way to you. Strangers knock on your door at the exact moment you were thinking about something they have expertise in. Cayce called this grace alignment. When a space is blessed, it becomes a hub for meaningful connection. The benevolent presence doesn't just protect, they orchestrate. Sign 9. The sense of being witnessed without discomfort. You're alone, but you don't feel alone. Not in a creepy way, in a companionable way, as if someone who loves you is sitting quietly nearby, not intruding, just present. You talk aloud to them sometimes, tell them about your day, ask for advice. You don't hear an audible response, but you feel one. A warmth, a knowing. This is not invasive. Blessed presences don't spy, they witness. There's a difference. Surveillance creates shame. Witnessing creates safety. And sign 10. The absence of negative phenomena. Blessed homes don't accumulate bad energy. Arguments lose their charge quickly. Difficult emotions move through cleanly rather than sticking in the walls. Even when hardship visits, it doesn't linger. There are no cold spots, no oppressive atmospheres, no sense of being watched with malice. The energy stays high, clear, and gentle. Cayce taught that these 10 signs rarely appear in isolation. Blessed homes display several simultaneously, creating an unmistakable pattern. If you recognize 3 or more of these signs in your own space, you're not imagining things. You're living in a benediction, but even blessings can become complicated. Edgar Cayce issued a warning that few discuss. Even benevolent presences can become problematic if the living grow dependent on them. Some families stop making their own decisions. They constantly ask deceased loved ones for guidance, through mediums, through signs, through desperate prayers. Should I take this job? Should I marry this person? Should I move? Every choice is outsourced, every decision deferred. Others become so attached to the comfort of the presence that they refuse to let the spirit fully move on. They cling, they beg them to stay, and the spirit, out of love, lingers longer than they should. This is a subtle form of bondage, disguised as devotion. Cayce taught that true blessing involves autonomy on both sides. The spirit helps, but they don't control. The living honor, but they don't cling. How do you know when the balance has tipped? You feel unable to leave the home. The thought of moving creates panic because you fear losing the connection. You need permission from the deceased for every choice. You've stopped trusting your own inner guidance, or the presence begins to feel heavier rather than lighter. What once brought peace now brings pressure, obligation, guilt. If any of these signs appear, Cayce advised a ritual of release. Speak aloud to the spirit with love and gratitude. Thank them for their protection. Tell them they're free to move forward into their next stage of evolution. Release them with blessing. This doesn't mean they'll leave entirely. It means you're no longer holding them in place with your need. True love, Cayce taught, includes the courage to let go, even of those who bless us from beyond. But if the balance is healthy, if the blessing remains mutual, there are ways to deepen it. If you recognize these signs in your home, Edgar Cayce offered specific practices to deepen and stabilize the blessing. First, conscious acknowledgement. Speak to the presence aloud. Express gratitude. Name them if you know who they are. Thank you, Grandma. I feel you here. I'm grateful for your protection. Acknowledgement clarifies the channel. It makes the connection stronger, clearer, more tangible. Second, maintain spiritual hygiene. Pray regularly. Meditate. Read sacred texts. Whatever practice aligns with your path, do it consistently. Cayce taught that spiritual practices keep the frequency of the home high, making it easier for benevolent spirits to dwell there. A home filled with bitterness, addiction, or cruelty creates static. The spirit can't reach you through the noise. Third, honor their memory through action. Live in ways that would make them proud. Complete work they cared about. Embody values they held. Don't just talk about them, become the continuation of their legacy. This is how you sanctify their blessing. You don't just receive it, you live it forward. Fourth, create a small altar or dedicated space. Photos, candles, flowers, incense. Not as worship, as a focal point for connection, a place where the veil is intentionally thinned. Cayce explained that these practices don't summon spirits, they clarify the bridge that's already there. They make communication easier, blessings more tangible. And one more thing, live with reverence. Treat your home as sacred, not just functional. Speak kindly within its walls. Welcome the broken and the weary through its door. A home that serves becomes a home that's served. But why your home? Why you? The answer lies deeper than this lifetime. Here's the question many ask. Why does your grandmother bless your home and not your cousins? Why does one sibling feel the presence and another doesn't? Edgar Cayce revealed that ancestral blessings follow soul lineage, not always blood lineage. The spirits who return to protect and guide you are those you've shared lifetimes with. Karmic family, soul family, not necessarily genetic family. Sometimes the stranger who lived in your home generations ago blesses it because you were their child in another life. Sometimes a friend feels more present after death than a biological parent because the soul bond is older, deeper, forged across multiple incarnations. Cayce taught that soul groups reincarnate in clusters. You return together, playing different roles. Mother becomes daughter, brother becomes friend, spouse becomes sibling. The love transcends the role. The protection follows the soul. In one reading, a woman asked why she felt so profoundly connected to a house she'd just purchased. Cayce told her she had lived there 3 lifetimes ago as someone else. The benevolent presence guarding the home was her own soul from another incarnation, along with loved ones from that lifetime. You didn't just buy a house. You returned to a sanctuary your soul already knew. This is why some homes feel like homecoming the moment you walk in. This is why certain spaces hold you when the world doesn't. The blessing is older than you realize. The vow of protection was made centuries ago. And love, true love, doesn't forget. But what if the person you're grieving hasn't returned to bless you yet? What if you're still waiting? If you're grieving, this chapter is written for you. The question you're carrying, will they come back to bless my home? Will I ever feel them again? Edgar Cayce's answer, it depends. Not all deceased become ancestral guardians. Some souls need to move forward into new incarnations immediately. That's not abandonment, that's growth. Their path requires different lessons now, and holding them back with your grief would harm both of you. But many do return, especially in the first year after death, to ensure you're okay, to complete unfinished conversations, to offer protection during your most vulnerable time. Cayce taught that the soul's development determines whether they can bless or not. A soul who died in peace, who completed their life's work, who crossed with love, they're more likely to have the clarity and energy to return as a benediction presence. A soul who died in trauma, confusion, or rage may take longer. They need healing in the borderland before they can offer healing to you. This doesn't mean they don't love you. It means they're learning, growing, preparing for reunion in ways you can't see yet. So what do you do while you wait? Look for the signs. Don't demand them, but don't dismiss them either. The fragrance, the dream, the inexplicable moment of protection. They may be subtler than you expected, quieter, but they're there. And know this, even if you never perceive their presence, love doesn't end at death. It translates into forms you may not recognize but will always feel. The warmth you feel when you think of them, the strength that rises in you when you need it most, the clarity that arrives when you're lost. That's them, working through you, blessing you from the inside out. Edgar Cayce taught that grief is the soul's way of honoring love. Don't rush it, but don't let it become your only relationship with them. They're still here, just differently, and you can live in a way that invites their presence, whether you perceive it or not. Whether or not you've experienced these signs, Edgar Cayce taught a profound practice. Live as if your home is already blessed. Speak to your ancestors aloud. Thank the spirits of the land. Treat your space as sacred, not just functional. This isn't self-deception, it's invocation. Cayce explained that blessing isn't only something spirits confer, it's a frequency you co-create. When you live reverently, gratefully, consciously, you make your home a place where benevolent spirits want to dwell. You become the blessing, and they amplify it. Light candles with intention. Offer prayers of gratitude before meals. Welcome guests with the awareness that you're hosting souls, not just bodies. Speak kindly to the walls, the floors, the threshold. Bless the roof that shelters you and the ground beneath your feet. It sounds strange until you try it. Then you realize the house responds. The energy shifts. The atmosphere clears. You start noticing synchronicities, small moments of grace that weren't there before. Because you've opened the door, you've extended the invitation, and the ancestors, the benevolent dead, the spirits who've been waiting, they walk through. The 10 signs aren't just evidence of presence. They're feedback loops, confirmation that you're living in alignment with the invisible support that's always been there, waiting for you to notice. You don't have to see them to honor them. You don't have to prove they exist to live as if they do. And the moment you begin, the blessing deepens. This is how Edgar Cayce lived, in constant communion with the unseen, trusting that love transcends every boundary, including death. You can live this way too. starting now. If this video stirred something in you, if it made your heart beat faster or brought tears to your eyes, you're not imagining things. You may be living in a blessed home right now, surrounded by ancestors, guides, and benevolent dead who've been waiting, sometimes for years, for you to see them. They're not angry that it took this long. They're patient. They're love itself. And love doesn't keep score. Edgar Cayce spent his entire life teaching one essential truth. The veil between worlds is thinner than we've been taught. Death is not an ending, it's a doorway. And those who love us don't stop loving us just because they've crossed through. Subscribe to this channel to explore more of Cayce's hidden teachings on the afterlife, soul travel, karmic lineage, and how to live in conscious partnership with the unseen. These aren't just theories, they're invitations to a deeper life, a richer life, one where you're never truly alone. Share this video with someone who needs to know their loved one is still close, who's been waiting for a sign, who's been aching for reassurance that death isn't the end of connection.